Hello, gorgeous, wonderful people. I am here to talk about the best books that I read in 2021. So, some breakdown for 2021. I read 95, 96 books. I think 95 books. I don't know. Last 2 weeks of December, I thought, okay, do I want to cram 5 books in about a week and a half to try and make my 100 book reading goal? And it just didn't feel genuine or good to just sort of read books to rush through them. It's something I don't really want to do just to reach an arbitrary numbered goal. So I decided to just chill out, slow down, and I read about 95 books. And so out of those 95, I'm going to be talking about kind of my top 20 because it felt really hard to only choose 10. It felt like such a disservice. And then I thought I'd do 15. And then that even felt hard, so I'm doing a top 15 with 5 runner-ups. So I guess I'll start with the runner-ups, and these are in no particular order. For many of these were just books that most of them are fiction that I really loved, but I didn't feel like they were like the top books that I read this year. So to start with, Infinite Country by Patricia Engel. I read that book in February of this year, so feels like forever ago. It's actually one of the first books I think I read in this apartment when I moved in. Loved it. It follows a girl in Colombia who is trying to escape prison so she can get on a plane to go to America to be reunited with her family. And it is a story very much about the pains of the U.S. immigration system and sort of how this family has been brought together, torn apart by this. But it's very beautiful in the way that it's written. It brings in a lot of Andean myth and also talks a lot about the Colombian drug cartel and those sorts of things. So it was a really interesting novel. I really loved reading it, and it's something that I often recommend to people. Then I read Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I believe I read this summer. This is a book really about a mother and a daughter, and the daughter figuring out whether she wants to be a mother and their relationship and dealing with all the trauma that comes with that. Beautifully written, funny, but dark, but beautiful. Highly recommend Burnt Sugar. And then another runner-up is Virtue Hoarders by Catherine Liu. This was a small little nonfiction that I read this spring, I think maybe March or April. And Catherine Liu is one of my favorite scholars. She's a media professor, I think at one of the UCs in California. And Virtue Hoarders is really like her kind of expose or look at the professional managerial class. And if you're wondering if you're a PMC, you probably are. If you're basically not a blue collar worker, you are a PMC for the most part. And kind of how PMC has created this virtue hoarding class where we sort of get to say what's good, what's bad, what's right, what words you can use, what words you can't use. I know that probably sounds really scary and weird and right-wing to you, but it's really not. She takes this from a very socialist lens. So I recommend anybody should read Virtue Hoarders because it's a really good critique of your own class, which I think is very necessary in today's world. And it kind of cuts through a lot of bullshit, which I love because as someone who works in academia and all this stuff about virtue hoarding, there's a lot of bullshit. So highly recommend Virtue Hoarders. And then one that I really loved, but I didn't put in my top 15, which I'm kind of shocked by, but is I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness by Claire Vaye Watkins. This is Claire Vaye Watkins' newest novel. It is very much autofiction, but I also read Gold Fame Citrus, which did make my top 15, so we'll get to that later. But yes, highly recommend I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness. I feel like I just have to give it a shout out because although it didn't make my top 15, it was still a really beautiful read. I'd love to read it again. Lots of women unraveled, motherhood unraveling them. I want to say it's like The Lost Daughter, but more drugs, if that makes sense. So The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante, but make it more California hippie culture. I don't know. So desert weirdness. Okay, so those are my runner-ups. That was actually only 4. But let's dive into my top 15. Okay, so coming in at number 15 is Parakeet by Marie-Helene Bertino. I read this in May of this year, and I did not know what to expect going into it. I heard it was kind of weird, definitely had some magical realism, but it's essentially a woman on the week before her wedding day is visited by her dead grandmother in the form of a parakeet. And it's her grandmother saying, go find your brother. If you don't go find your brother, because she's been estranged from her brother for a while, I'm going to wreak havoc for the next week of your life and ruin your wedding day. So just to start with, really weird, but it's really funny. It was really beautifully written about family and trauma and like making a big decision. And it had a lot of like interesting magical realism that I really liked. I'm usually not into that, but this one did it really well. And again, I love books about women on the cusp of big decisions and kind of grappling with the choices in their lives. So that was one of the reasons I really loved Parakeet. Okay, and next, coming in at number 14 is Second Place by Rachel Cusk. This was my first Cusk, and I was really excited to read it because I've heard so much hype around Rachel Cusk, and this book came out this year. It was shortlisted for the Booker, and it was a really good reading experience. So I read it in July, actually when I was on vacation this summer, and it was just one of the most incredible ways of communicating misogyny that I've read in a long time. Cusk is really, really good at like taking misogyny, feminism, patriarchy, all these gender issues, and like kind of just like putting them in a vortex and like spitting out these like gorgeous, smart, and intellectual like ways, like weaved into a narrative about just kind of how we exist in the world. And specifically, she really focuses on like the power dynamic between men and women and the relationships that men and women have. And Second Place was a lot of that. It was a lot about the male gaze. I feel like the majority of that book was kind of a narrative about a woman wanting to be free, but feeling like she can't escape the male gaze. So I love Second Place. It was written in a series of letters, which was interesting. I just read another Cusk about a week ago that I also really loved. So excited to read more Cusk in 2022. Want to read the Outline trilogy. That is next on my list. Okay, coming in at number 13 is Euphoria by Lily King. This was my first Lily King novel that I read. I had the book Euphoria for forever. I don't know why. I just decided to pick it up this year, and I absolutely loved it. It was like every sort of thing I love in a novel. It was historical fiction. It had a really interesting premise. It was about the anthropologist Margaret Mead. That's what this fictional retelling of her life is sort of about. And it specifically also has a love triangle, which was really well played out. And it talked about some really deep concepts of what is culture, and also like some like digs at like misogyny in academia. It was just a really, really well-written novel. I really loved it. I recommend it. It's one of those things where people want a novel and like read Euphoria by Lily King. It's just a great novel all around. I think it has something for everybody in it. Okay, so number 12 is, let's see. So this one's hard. Excuse me, I'm kind of cheating, but I'm just gonna say that number 12 is, these are upside down, wow, is The Seasonal Quartet by Allie Smith. So I technically didn't read Autumn in 2021. I read it in 2020, autumn of 2020, but I did a seasonal reading of all of these this year, sure. So I read winter and I think February, spring, I read this in May, and then summer, I read this in August. And it was just a really beautiful, grounding experience to have each one of these to sort of look forward to and read each season. I really love these. Some people really don't. They have plots, but they're sort of not the most plotty. They're all a response to Brexit in a way. They're very connected to art and language, which I really loved, and literature. So I just found them a joy to read. They made me feel beautiful things, think beautiful things, and yeah, I recommend the quartet, and I really liked reading them seasonally. So that was sort of a cheat, but we'll count all of these as number 12. Okay, then at number 11, I read Happy Hour by Marlo Granados. So this I just read maybe 2 weeks ago, and I'm calling it Party Girl Lit Fic. Loved it so much. It follows two young girls who are immigrants from, it seems like, the UK and somewhere in Eastern Europe that are living in New York City the summer, I think 2013. They're just kind of scraping by. They have no money, but they're going out, they're partying, they're like having fun, they're wanting to experience life. And it's so well written and beautiful, and talks about, and I love how it portrays young women in this very honest and raw way where they're given respect, which I really, really appreciated. Young women being portrayed as smart, clever, just knowing, not necessarily knowing what they want, and being, yeah, messy because we're something like 21 years old, 22 years old, but really giving them the chance to be able to tell their story. And it talks a lot about class, a lot about privilege. I love that it was published by Verso Books, which is usually a very like left-leaning political publication. So that was really interesting. I love that it came out through Verso. So I definitely recommend Happy Hour. It's like a romp, but also makes you think. A really good novel. Okay, and then coming in at number 10 is Circe by Madeline Miller. So I read Circe, well, the story of Circe is long. I picked up Circe at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, and I read the first page, and it was something about like nymphs bathing in a river, and I was like, I can't do fantasy. I'm like not a fantasy person. So I was like, ugh, and then I like shut it, returned it to the library, didn't pick it up until a year later, so the spring of 2021. I gave it a second chance because I've heard people talking about it, and let me tell you, it was such an incredible read. If you don't know, Circe is a Greek myth retelling about the goddess/witch Circe, that if you've read the Odyssey, is someone that Odysseus encounters on his journey. Madeline Miller is a classicist, so her Greek retellings are immaculate. The language is gorgeous. They're just a beautiful reading experience. And what I loved about reading Circe is it awakened an interest in me in Greek myth and wanting to read more Greek myth retellings. I ended up reading the Song of Achilles. I ended up reading another kind of Greek myth retelling, but I will say that Circe so far is the best that I've read this year. So highly, highly recommend Circe. If there's like a mom in your life, recommend Circe, because I feel like that's every mom. I think my boyfriend's mom, my mom, other people's moms. I'm like, tell your mom to read Circe. It's a great book. Yeah, so that was number 10. So coming in at number 9 is Drive Your Plows Over the Bones of the Dead. And this was written by Olga Taraszuk. She is a Polish writer. It was translated from Polish to English, and it was so amazing. Very much, people have talked about this, but it's very similar to Ottessa Moshfegh's Death in Her Hands. It's sort of an older woman living alone in the woods, her mind's starting to unravel. Animals have been getting mysteriously murdered in her like small little Polish mountain town, and you're not really sure what's going on. So it's like that mixed with like interesting musings on like William Blake poetry and astrology and vegetarianism, and it was just written so beautifully. I'm really excited to read more of her work. She's coming out with this like giant book, huge book called the Book of Jacob, that like dives deep into like Polish history, which I'm really fascinated about. I also started watching The Witcher, which I know is a fantasy series based on Polish myths. So either way, again, I love books that like spark other interests, and Drive Your Plows definitely like sparked interest in like Poland for me as a country and its history. So love that book. It's a great like winter kind of dark read. It's sort of like a mystery, but not like cheesy in a way. So again, also just a great recommendation to people overall. Okay, so number 8, is that what we're on? I think it is. Losing track. Yeah, number 8 is Painting Time by Mylis de Carangal. I'm sorry. This was a French translated work, and I talked about it recently in my last reading wrap up. It's something I read this fall at the end of November. And this is a coming of age story about a young artist living in France who's going to decorative art school. So it's different in that they're learning to paint like replicas of marble and replicas of wood. And it gets really cuts to questions of like, what is art? What does it mean to be an artist? It's also kind of her discovering who she is, her love of art, her labor, like, and then also like there's like a love story entangled in that. It was just really beautifully written. It's written very French, these sweeping, gorgeous sentences. Yeah, I highly recommend Painting Time. I just like also reinvigorated my love for art. Started watching some Sister Wendy after this. I don't know if you ever watched Sister Wendy, but she's this really awesome old nun that gives wonderful art history lectures. You can find some of it on YouTube. So yeah, shout out to Sister Wendy. Okay, so number 7, we're getting through this, y'all. You can see I'm starting like my voice hurts, is Priest Daddy by Patricia Lockwood. So as far as like authors of the year, Patricia Lockwood is one of my top authors that I started reading this year. Priest Daddy is her memoir about how when she was in her 20s, she had to move home with her parents. Her husband and her had to move home with her parents due to financial issues, but her dad is a Catholic priest and her family is very, very Catholic, and they live in the Midwest. And so she, after living this sort of, had left home, lived this very like liberal, libertine lifestyle, living in Savannah. She ends up coming back, living with her Catholic family, and it sort of explores that relationship that she has, and it, in true Lockwood style, it'll make you like cry, laugh, and then just like actually weep. So beautiful, beautiful book. Loved it so much. I also recommend this to a lot of people, people who sort of like essays that are funny, but also like hit close to home, like a little bit David Sedaris-y, but different. I can't totally compare them the same, but really, really loved Priest Daddy. Also, anyone worth religious trauma, Priest Daddy is a good read. Okay, so then coming in at number 6, I read Gold Famed Citrus by Claire V. Watkins. So this was also, Claire V. Watkins is another author of the year. A lot of these ones coming up in the top 5 are going to be like authors I discovered this year that I'm really excited about and want to read more about. So Gold Famed Citrus follows a young girl. I guess she's not young. She's in her like 20s. I don't know why I said young girl. Someone in their 20s. And her boyfriend, and they're living in Los Angeles when basically Los Angeles has become a desert wasteland with barely any water and everyone's left. And it's kind of them living in this run out celebrity mansion. And the story kind of starts where they come upon a child in sort of this like slum by the beach, and they decide to take the child in to raise the child and sort of save it from destitution. And it is gorgeous. It involves a lot of like desert landscape, cult stuff, very Southern California, very like just beautiful, beautiful writing. I read it in like a day. Highly recommend. I mean, it was hard. I could have put both I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness and Gold Fame Citrus on here, but Gold Fame Citrus for me, since it was maybe my first Clairvaux Watkins, it just really stood out to me, and I thought it was a gorgeous, wonderful, creative book. So highly recommend it. Okay, top 5. Wow. Breathe, everybody. Okay, so number 5 is Rebecca Solnit's Recollections of My Non-Existence. So this is sort of, yeah, it's a memoir. It even says it on the cover, a memoir. This is a memoir of Rebecca Solnit's journey through young womanhood when she moves on her own in San Francisco. And it's her discovering her artistry, her starting to write. It's a very beautiful expose on a very specific moment in time, which is the 70s and 80s in San Francisco. And I love Rebecca Solnit. She's one of my favorite writers, and this was a beautiful exploration of resilience, standing up against patriarchy, choosing to, art above all else. It was one of those memoirs. I thought it was really beautifully crafted. And yeah, I love Rebecca Solnit. Love this book. What else is new? So she's always makes the top 10 of every year, I feel like. So yeah, highly recommend this memoir. Okay, then next was The Life of the Mind by Christine Smallwood. This book was one of the most influential books I read this year. It follows a professor who is having a miscarriage and is also dealing with the precarity of academia and what it means to want to live a life of the mind. And I felt so strongly connected to so many of the themes, especially those around academia, because it's really rough out there. And this was written in such a beautiful way, portraying that struggle, and also the struggle of kind of whether to have a family or not, and whether to be a mother or not. And it reminded me a lot of Sheila Heti's Motherhood, of Want by Lynn Stager Strong, of anything Jenny Awful has written. It was very, very similar. This is one of those books I would read again. Really, truly, truly loved The Life of the Mind. Highly recommend. Okay, so number 3, top 3, we have Blueberries. Number 3, Blueberries by Elena Savage. And we can thank, as we all know, the wonderful, gorgeous, amazing Rebecca Eats Books for getting everybody in the world to read Blueberries. Blueberries is a set of essays by an Australian writer. I believe she's an expat now that lives in Europe, though, Elena Savage. And these are just a book of essays, musings about sexual assault. Again, there's a great essay in here, Blueberries, the namesake, that like really just cuts through so much academia bullshit, which I really, really loved. These essays are just really smart, forward-thinking. I think what we really, really need, her voice, is how I would describe Elena Savage. We need someone with her sort of razor sharp like wit and understanding of the world around us to be able to, I don't know, better ourselves and the world. That sounds really dramatic, but I just really think what she has to say is really important, and they're not really being said very much. So I really loved Blueberries. Highly recommend people read it. And again, Rebecca Eats Books. You should get a commission, honestly. Okay. So number 2 is also a cheat, because it's not really 2. If you can guess, it's another quartet, and of course it is the Neapolitan Quartet by Elena Ferrante. This was, I don't know, these books changed my life. Elena Ferrante has changed my life. Reading her, she was probably the author of the year for me. I read these books and The Lost Daughter this year, and excited to read The Days of Abandonment and anything else she has written. These books they're a masterpiece. They are the most incredible portrayal of like female friendship, women trying to make their way in the world as women in a world that is violent, that is, not conducive to women who want to think, to women who want to think for themselves, and really just cut through so much. It's a masterpiece. That's all I can say. If you don't know, the seasonal quartet follows two girls who grow up in post-war Italy, and follows them to present day, and their lives and all the twists and turns that those take. And it is written in this gorgeous language that Elena Ferrante has crafted. If you read anything in life, read these books. And I will probably read them again. They're like one of those books, they're classics. I am so grateful that I got to read them for the first time this year. So this was the Neapolitan Quartet. If I had to pick a favorite out of all of these, I don't know. Honestly, the first one's it focuses more on childhood, and there's something really special in that. It kind of reminded me of Little Women a little bit. I don't know why. But I actually really think that Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, because I think what the character Lenu went through in this book was really important, and I wasn't expecting it either, so I think this one may have been my favorite. So I don't know, but really it's hard to see them as individual books because they're all one perfect, glorious thing. So that was number 2, and it was really hard to choose between 2 and 1. They're really like the same. Number 1 for me this year is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, because this book, I think, is, for me, got to the heart of so much of the trauma that we are living through right now in the internet age. And I think that the way that she crafted this was so beautiful in a way because it was accessible, it was funny, and then it would turn around and just break your heart. But break your heart in a way that was also accessible, if that makes sense. I think that this book is something you can give to so many people, and that they will read it and it will touch them. Like, I think that you don't, it's not highfalutin at all. I just really appreciated her, that she wrote this, and it's very much autofiction as well. It deals with something that happened in her life, and I think it, so many of us, I think right now, are looking around and being like, what is this dystopian society that we live in? And this book doesn't give an answer, but it does commentate on it, commentate. And I would read it again and again and again. It's the book that impacted me the most this year, touched me the most deeply. No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. I absolutely loved it. Again, one of my authors of the year, Patricia Lockwood, Elena Ferrante, top authors that I read. So that was 2021. Thank you so much for watching and listening if you have made it this far. For 2022, I actually want to read less books. I don't want to feel rushed. I want to read chunkier books, big, thick books, and really get lost in a narrative, in a story. And I know for me that's going to mean reading some Russians. I also want to read some 20th century, early 20th century novels. I want to read more Virginia Woolf, some Edith Wharton. So I'm excited to just sort of focus on beautiful, meaty sentences and language, and not really feel like I need to rush through books. I'm not saying I rushed through books this year. I want to focus more in 2022. So those are kind of my goals, but I hope you enjoyed my top 15 / sort of 20, because I gave honorable mentions. And yeah, happy reading, everybody.